let's move to Cleveland. So we got to talk about the core four because, man, we've had some conversations about them over the last year plus. I'm going to sort of truncate the question. Should we believe in Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley, Jarrett Allen figuring it out?
I'm going to say yes. And a lot of this this is what I can't wrap my head around. Their first year together, the Cavs have a 122 offensive rating, basically, when you have Garland, Mitchell, and Mobley playing in lineups beside Jarrett Allen. And so, that's just a massive difference from what we saw last year when they didn't really play a ton together because of injuries. And we saw that offensive rating ended up dipping. And the fact that they fared, so they were 122 when Jarrett Allen was off the court. I apologize, last year. And that's something that becomes difficult. But when you start gaming it with, well, if Jarrett Allen is the sole big, I think that my point being, I feel like we've leaned too far into thinking that this can't work because of what happened last year, where there was a ton of stop and start availability from all of their core four. I mean, Jarrett Allen held out as long as he could, but then he ends up being banged up by the end of the playoffs. And so,
and he's the one that gets criticized for being soft and not fighting through injuries.
Right. And so their offensive rating with him, by the way, but all four of these guys in their first season together, 121. So I was off by a point with that. That I understand it fell apart in the playoffs, but Mobley's not the same player he was. He's taking above the break threes now. Small volume, took him, hit them towards the end of the regular season. Can he up that volume, become more reliable there, continue to adjust against physicality? Do I think this is a perfectly complementary big four? I would say no, because in the end, it does feel like every single one of them has to make material concessions or adjustments to how they would play. Maybe not so much Donovan Mitchell because he's just central to everything, but I'm going to choose to believe in them. And they haven't done anything this offseason, by the way, that would make, they haven't added a new player. There's just, aside from the draft, obviously, Isaac Okoro is still floating around out there as we record this. I still just believe that the floor spacing, because of where Mobley was at in year one, and you didn't have Max Strus, it was just worse in year one. And yet you had 121 offensive rating with those four on the court. And there's other noise. It's what do you look like defensively when Evan Mobley is the lone big? There's always their rebounding with this team is just so weird. During their dual big minutes, still, I can't, the talent we talked about. This might have been on the previous podcast. It was with DeRozan and the Kings. If we're going to trust him, Sabonis, Monk, and Fox to figure it out, why are we not trusting these four to figure it out?
Right, because as weird as it is, the complementary skills are way more there for this Cavs group than they are for the Kings. I think the way it kind of breaks down is what if Darius Garland just doesn't have a terrible year last year? What if he doesn't get hit in the face 36 times by November?
Yeah, what's his per 36-minute rate of getting?
Oh, it's off the charts, 100%, 100th percentile.
Does he get hit in the face more per 36 minutes, or does Evan Mobley take more threes per 36 minutes?
Oh, that's a great. Mark that one down for we revisit it after the year, see how close it is. But if Garland is just his 2 years ago self, and Mobley makes the strides he made last year, I don't know what the conversation is right now, because maybe the Cavs were awesome. It really, we've all belabored the it's two small guards and it's two non-spacing bigs. Well, maybe Mobley is spacing now. And what if Garland he's not going to help you defensively. He's too small, but what if he has his, all-star level season? I agree. I don't know if we should believe this is definitely going to work, but for sure, they need a chance. They need another full year. You don't break this up. You still got to find that fifth guy, for the third year in a row, I guess.
Oh, I found him.
Did you?
It's Dorian Finney-Smith. This is the Dorian Finney-Smith team. You have the wiggle room to where you can still aggregate salaries, and it's just get there and don't let the hang up be oh, do we really want to give up Jalen Tyson yes, you do. Jalen Tyson plus salary, maybe some seconds are included. That just feels I know everyone has Philly circled for the middle of the year. This is the Dorian Finney-Smith team for me. He works whether you're playing two bigs or whether you're playing one big. I think that's the answer.
Just Moses Moody fits in perfectly. Trade for him. Warriors.
Again, we want to, by the way, us saying to keep them together. If people want to talk about how we contradict ourselves, go back to that podcast after they were eliminated from the playoffs, and The Athletic drops that pre-written post-mortem. And Grant and I still will eat through the Cavs for the way they traded Jarrett Allen in that piece. Disgusting. But
yeah. But I'm also on record a million times. Well, you probably gave me an over/under of like 1.5 of the core four being gone. I was like, hard over. There's no way Donovan Mitchell's back.
We haven't talked about this though, but there's kind of been much ado over Evan Mobley getting the max with the potential for it to go to the super max. We say this all the Brian Windhorst calls this the fun max. It's when you have to bet on unfinished products. And I think that I will say what the Cavs are asking Mobley to do. And this is what we might've gotten right. Remember the initial podcast where we called the Jarrett Allen contract a disaster for Cleveland? I think the part of that we got right was we were worried about whether that would infringe upon Evan Mobley's growth as an offensive player. That's still something to factor in. But the fact that he's this good already in, I'll say, less than ideal offensive circumstances most of the time, I can't bring myself to have a problem with that. You made the case of why give it to him now? Why not make him wait? I think that's fair if you thought you were going to save money, but this isn't a team that was going to have cap space next summer.
It's more defensible for them than Houston, who we talked about on the last pod, because they don't gain. His cap hold's enormous. They don't, it's not like, this opens up flexibility to do whatever. That's not the case.
So I have to give to you the Detroit Pistons. What do I want to go with? All right. Okay. I have to ask this. Grant, which of their 5 main prospects is most likely to get lost in the shuffle next season? You're in this weird spot where they just have 5 guys that they are, according to their draft position, they are heavily invested in. Cade Cunningham, who they already gave the max extension to, also didn't have a problem with that. Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, Ron Holland, and Asar Thompson. But you're also in a unique position where 4 of those guys were drafted before the current front office was put in place. And so we could get into whether you think they have enough spacing around Cade now in general. I would argue the answer is yes. The problem is none of that spacing comes from the other 4 most important prospects on the team.
Right. So to me, it's pretty clearly Ivy. And part of that's because it's sort of already happened before, even before Ron Holland shows up, Ivy was like, I don't know, what does he really do for this team? Like, he's got to be on the ball, but like, Cade Cunningham's on the ball. Like, this is Cade Cunningham's team. Like, so that's, plenty of teams have a secondary offensive initiator that is an iffy shooter, and you don't love his decision-making and his deep, like Ivy could work, but it's like, we've already seen Ivy with less surrounding young talent than they will have this year. Kind of like, actually maybe Killian Hayes is gone, so Ivy's just going to play plenty, but like, it has to be him, because I think Thompson, you just play him for the defense and hope he figures anything else out at all. Holland, I think you just would have to view his ceiling as higher than Ivy based on Ivy's first couple of years. So I think it's fairly clearly Ivy for me. Do you have another candidate that you think might get squeezed?
I'm wondering if it is going to be Asar Thompson or Ron Holland, just because there's so much overlap there with the concerns that they bring. But I think when you're looking at Jaden Ivey, this is kind of, speaking of contradicting ourselves, this feels like, should he just come off the bench? Does that make the most sense for this team? Because you're able to kind of split up your spacing then that way between the starting 5 and some of the bench units, gives him more opportunities on the ball. But we just said you have to start Scoot Henderson in Portland. And now we're going to sit here and be like, I do think it's different because Cade Cunningham is already that primary guy in Detroit.
And Ivy's had a longer stretch to sort of show what he does or doesn't have. I don't know how fair that is just given the situation, but Scoot's got one brutal year. Ivy's got a couple that probably weren't quite as bad, definitely weren't quite as bad as Scoot was, but not great. I feel like, and this is true for any of these guys, but maybe more so for Ivy, because we're far enough in now where if he gets relegated to bench duties, it's kind of like when we see a guy fall from a higher salary range to like a minimum salary, it's so hard to recover. It's like, if you get sent to the bench now at this stage of your career for Ivy, it's like, is that just what you are? Like Chris Dunn went down that road, like super highly touted, but same kind of similar thing. It's hard to get it back. And so it would feel like a big concession from the Pistons. And having said that, I still think he's just clearly the guy that makes more sense to bring off the bench. So you're just admitting.
And it doesn't help that it'd be a different, like, they're not demoting or bringing him off the bench to favor Killian Hayes. They're like, he comes off the bench when he's 16 games off the bench, whatever it was last year. It's we're doing this to better balance the team and actually increase your opportunity. And there's more coherence behind it because again, like he's not making
Yeah.
a sacrifice based off these. The other, if you really wanted to game it out, well, I want to phrase this way: who is, and it's obviously Cade is the answer. So aside from Cade, of the remaining four, who is like immediately the most important? Like you're looking at, like they're going to be the ones that are central to the closing units. They're going to give them real opportunity next season. I'll give you my answer. I think it's just having the sample size with Asar Thompson. I think it's him, but I also am just like the front office drafted Ron Holland.
Yeah.
And so is it just him?
I think on the theory, I was going to say Holland. I love Thompson so much, though. I just think that defensive potential is so rare. But Holland, to be fair, ever since Was said Holland was his top guy, I'm just like, well, he knows more than I do, so I'm on board. Like, I just believe he could be the best player on this team. Eventually. I don't know how realistic that is. The front office picked Ron Holland. The front office did not pick anybody else here, so I think he's your guy, right? Like, that's just how it works.